How you doing, guys? This is Eric from RuleTheWasteland.com. One of the subjects that I've covered multiple times here in videos and on the website is composting. There's a lot of reasons why you would want to compost, certainly during your everyday life and especially during any sort of disaster or shit hit the fan scenario. There's a lot of benefits there. And one of the resources that I mentioned during the last video I did on composting was a book called Compost Everything by David the Good, which I had not actually read yet at that point. And I contacted the publisher. They were nice enough to send me a copy so I can let you guys know my thoughts on the book. It's available on Amazon. You can check out the link in the description below in either the e-publisher formats or whatever, the ebook reader formats, or in a physical copy. I always recommend for anything that you guys are thinking of using during or after any sort of disaster scenario, it's probably not a bad idea to have a physical copy of that. That way you're not relying on electricity or any sort of electronic device to be able to access that information, but that's up to you. You could always get the digital format and take notes or print something off, I guess. Anyways, in the book, it's called Compost Everything, like I said, and before I had read it, I sort of thought the book would be about addressing individual items, like maybe a cardboard box, waxed paper, cotton clothing, and how specifically to compost any of those things, which is not really what the book is about. And early in the book, the author tells you why, pretty much, which is that composting, as I've mentioned before, is pretty much just throwing everything into a giant pile and letting it rot. All you're doing other than that is controlling for variables. So the book goes into all the reasons why you would want to compost, which is a pretty comprehensive list, which I like, something like 30 reasons or something like that. I don't remember the exact number. Very good. Some of the ones that I hadn't even thought of in the past. And overall, I think this book is very good on being practical advice for how to compost in like a homesteading situation. It's not a long book. It's about 100 pages or something like that. So it doesn't go in depth into the actual process of what's happening like a book like the Rodale Book of Composting would. But that's not really That doesn't really matter if your goal is just practical application. So that's the strength of this book, is the practical application of, I've got this book, I want to create compost for gardening, what do I need to do? Bam, it gets right into it, tells you multiple methods for how to do that, certain issues that can be dealt or that you may encounter when you're doing composting. One of the things that I think could have been improved for certain areas is it mentions different methods, like a banana, or what's it called, banana circle or melon pits, which are sort of similar to hugelkultur and Zy farming methods that I may have mentioned before, but it doesn't matter. But anyways, I think some simple graphics would have been good to, especially for the banana circles or banana pits, that would have showed you really quickly without having to think about it too much exactly what's being described. The book does a good enough job of describing it that you can get a clear mental picture, but I think it would be easier for some people just to be able to see that, even just a simple line drawing, which isn't there. Doesn't really matter. Obviously not a huge deal. You could always go look up this technique, but it's not really hard to envision, but there's certain aspects of it, like placement within a berm, that would probably be easier to visualize for some people if there was a simple drawing there. And not a huge complaint, obviously, just something I think could have been improved. Other than that, the book does a great job of mentioning all these different methods and how they can be utilized in like a backyard or homesteading type situation, which is what most of us would be using it for. So that's useful. It briefly mentions human manure composting, and I think it also recommended the same resource that I always do, which is a human manure handbook, because that basically the resource for that. So it doesn't go too much in depth on that. Just deals with what you might have to deal with, pros and cons, that sort of thing, how you can utilize it in a normal homesteading type situation. One of the things that I really did like that this book got into that I haven't seen addressed in a lot of other composting resources is the danger of contamination in either commercially or locally sourced manures that you might use as a soil amendment or adding to your compost. A lot of people use manure because it's great for compost, but there's a lot of things in like commercial agriculture or even on the small local level that are ingested by the animals, either it's herbicides, pesticides, antibiotics, whatever, that aren't broken down enough so that they're still present in quantities and ways in the manure that can affect your compost and even things that you plant in the compost later. And one of the items that he specifically mentions is a chemical called aminopyralids or something like that, and that's actually, I believe, a herbicide, and it actually killed a whole batch of crops that he had planted in this compost because it was that much of a contaminant. So he talks about that and how you can avoid that, if it's possible to avoid it, what you should do about it, and that sort of thing. So overall, I think this book is definitely a worthwhile resource for anyone who's looking to get into composting in a homesteading or even backyard type situation. I will say that the emphasis is on composting for gardening for why you would, how you would use this composting for gardening, which is not necessarily why anyone is getting into composting. I will say it's probably the most common reason why people are composting is to create soil for gardening, but sometimes people just want to eliminate waste and keep it out of landfills and things like that. But this book is definitely focused on composting for gardening. So if that's not really what you're doing, maybe some other resource is better. I don't know. I still think it's worthwhile having this information, so I would check it out, especially because there's not that many great books or resources on composting out there. The ones I normally mention are like the Road to a Book of Compost, a Human or Compost, and this is definitely up there in the top 3 now. And for someone who really was just wanted to get started composting in their backyard, this is probably what I would put above those in terms of just useful, practical information that you can get the book, and then the next day after reading it, you can get out and get started. And so that's, I think, is really the strength of the book here, is the practicality and how you can just actually use the information right away. And it's not all like theory and science and everything that's just interesting and true, but not really helpful if you just want to go out there and create rich soil for your garden. So that's the strength of this book. I definitely recommend checking it out. It would not be a bad addition to your prepping or homesteading library. So if you guys want to check it out, once again, the links are in the description below. It is Compost Everything. So I'll talk to you guys later. Check it out.